It's like giving you the Legos, but you got to go make the castle. Whereas Vercel is giving that to you. In the simplest terms, it's managed infrastructure and a DX platform, right? And so instead of me spinning up Kubernetes clusters, thinking about utilization as I now start using a bunch of sandboxes for different agentic capabilities, we'll do that for you. You don't have to think about it. And then we also give you this platform that lets you iterate, collaborate, et cetera, a lot faster.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boredom Club today to another episode. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Jason Wolf. Jason.
Nice to be here. Greetings, everyone.
So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Jeanne Grosser, COO of Vercel, a company that revolutionizing how developers build, deploy, and scale modern web applications. Vercel has raised $863 million in total funding, and in its latest Series F funding last September, they've been valued at over $9 billion market cap valuation. Before Vercel, Jeanne has also had numerous other roles in top tech companies out there that I'm sure you're all familiar with, like Cisco, Google, and most recently as the Chief Business Officer of Stripe. So, Jeanne, thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. The pleasure is ours. So, Jeanne, I thought to start with a very interesting question about your career journey, because at the end, you worked before Vercel at Stripe, and you were part of the team building the financial infrastructure of the internet during a period of hyper growth, to say the least. But what lessons about go-to-market, team, and even products did you carry on to Vercel, and what even maybe some of them that turn out to be completely different in a way?
That's a good question. I mean, in joining Vercel, a big thing that I needed to do is there's certainly parallels between Stripe and Vercel. That's one of the reasons I got excited about Vercel. You know, it's a large platform-based business. It operates at a picks and shovels level, just like Stripe was an index to e-commerce. I think if Vercel does its job right, we're an index to AI. So you had a lot of those similarities. But as a leader, you also want to be careful not to over pattern match. And so as an example, Vercel is actually meaningfully more technical product than Stripe is. So Stripe, mostly an API, that's actually more straightforward to reason about from a go-to-market perspective. Whereas at Vercel, you're very much talking about infrastructure level decisions. So that's a big difference for us. We have a little bit more of a hybrid model of consumption-based business and other things that are occurring as well that I had to think through. So I did find quite a few parallels. One of them is how you work effectively between a go-to-market org and an engineering-driven company. And one of the things that Vercel is very focused on doing, particularly since our Series F, is moving more squarely into enterprise. So having really strong alignment between go-to-market and EPD about where you have product market fit and why is really one of the keys to success. Because if things aren't working, you can point figures at, is this the sales team doesn't know how to sell? Is it actually the product is missing functionality that it doesn't enable us to sell it effectively? How do you get on the same page? When I was at Stripe, one of the things we did really effectively was get crisp about precisely where we had strong product market fit, and then pursue companies that were sort of a lookalike of like what I'd say next concentric circle. So to give you an example, Lyft was a customer of Stripe's, early customer, scaled really big. Uber wasn't, but sort of next concentric circle of just like a larger enterprise variant of that. And so have done the same thing over here as well as we start to establish, okay, where do we clearly have strong product market fit that we can just run at that within go-to-market versus where do you have to get strong feedback loops in place with EPD.
And definitely about the product market fit now, it matters more than ever because all the vibe coding tools out there that you could build a product very easily, but if you don't have the right go-to-market, I mean, you could be in some problems right there, right?
One of the things that I think we've done very successfully at both companies is just go-to-market and EPD have to be integrated. So it's one thing to provide feedback, and I can talk about some things that I think we're doing that are pretty cool here at Vercel to create like a flywheel of a feedback loop. But the other one is just engineers need to be in front of customers right alongside you and hear that feedback. And so one of the things we've done is just like connect the humans. When we talk forward deployed engineering, sometimes that FDE is an actual engineer who's building the product, where it's like just that much more beneficial that that person go sit down shoulder to shoulder with our customer and work through a challenge for a day or a week. So that was sort of first thing that I would do anywhere is how do you establish more joint ownership and get engineers in customer facing things? Some of the things though that we've done on the feedback front that are awesome that you can now do in ways that I don't think you could have done as well pre-AI is we actually built a GTM feedback app. And so what this does is we've got an agent and we record, everything on Gong. The agent listens to these Gong calls. It's doing things to give you coaching, but one of the things it's also looking for is did things come up on that call that suggest gaps in the product? And so then at the end of the call, we have a Slack channel for every one of the customers we're working on. It'll say, hey, it sounds like there were gaps X, Y, and Z. Would you like me to add those to the GTM feedback tool? And if you agree, it'll pipe them into the GTM feedback tool. It associates them with that customer and that opportunity. So you get the dollar value, you know who wanted it. Then other AEs and SAs can go and upvote those things, add their customers to that. We then use that to review it in our weekly, we call it GTM EPD fusion meeting. We go through and prioritize those, get them added to the roadmap. One of the big things that EPD committed to here that I absolutely love is for everything, they will say yes, when, or no, why. So anything that we were suggesting for the roadmap, they have to do that. So you really close it out. And then what we're building out now is when that thing ships, we'll be able to go back to the GTM feedback tool and say, okay, feature XYZ is now live. And it will automatically then go notify all the Slack channels for the customers that wanted it and be able to say to the AE, hey, you said that your customer wanted this thing. It's available now. Here's some copy for how you might go reach out to them to talk about it. And then we're actually planning to track the full revenue by 30 days, 90 days, multiple quarters of all the AEs who said you needed this thing. Did you actually then go sell it when we built it? So that part's yet to come, but super excited to sort of do an actual closed loop process for GTM feedback.
We actually hosted the CEO of Gong, I think it was 6 months ago. So it's amazing how you use their product in order to get the real ROI out of AI. And Vercel is actually pivoted heavily toward AI and cloud products like V0, which has generated over 100 million applications in under 1 year, which is phenomenal. But how do you see these tools reshaping developers' workflows and the software lifecycle over, let's say, the next 2 or 3 years?
I mean, what's really interesting about Vercel is sort of it spent the last decade building out what we've called the front-end cloud. So being one of the best place to go build full stack front-end applications. But what was unique about Vercel is those front-end applications were meant to be very dynamic using serverless technology. And all of those types of capabilities are now super relevant to both agents and spinning up these new applications on the fly. So it turns out all of that hard work is going to pay off again in an agent first era. And so how we sort of see things shaping up is one, we've always been known for developer experience. We have a really good developer platform that enables all of our customers to have just meaningfully higher iteration velocity. And so for there, you really see how the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, is changing in a number of ways. One, agents are obviously getting introduced into that. And so we're adding agents across all of the surface area of our DX. So, if your build fails, we can identify why it failed, recommend a fix, and then you can just agree. At some point, you probably won't even bother to agree because the agent will be so good. Or anomaly detection. If you're getting lit up by a DDoS attack, today you'll have a high pressure situation where an engineer is trying to understand all the data and make a decision about how to prevent that versus having an anomaly detection agent that says, hey, you're under attack. Here's where I think it's coming from. Here's what I think you would do about it. Would you like me to execute that for you? And then also about the SDLC is just the participants in that are changing. So previously, predominantly designers, product managers, engineers. One, you're seeing those roles sort of squish with the ability to do rapid prototyping in tools like V0. But two, you're seeing folks like me become participants in the SDLC. So I'm not an engineer, might have wished I'd picked that profession, but I'm a business logic owner is how I'd position myself. And when it comes to an agent, you can sort of think as designers were to pixels, as a business logic owner is to an agent, right? I'm describing the thing I want automated, improved, et cetera. And so this happens today with my GTM engineering team. They go and they build an agent, they give it some context, and they'll go and they'll copy and paste the prompt that they've built into Slack for me to effectively QA. But right, the modern SDLC actually needs to give me a deployment preview for that prompt where I can say, awesome work, but I would have done this part differently. So anyway, all of that changes. And then sort of third thing is Vercel now has what we call the agent cloud, which is the actual infrastructure you need to run an agent is different from what we've used in the cloud for the last decade, 2 decades. And so everything that was under the hood of V0, we had to build those primitives for ourselves. And now we're giving them to the world through Vercel's agent cloud.
I agree. It's fascinating. Also, all your work with all the engineers out there, sort of like a community-led growth in a way. And now that you move to the enterprise is interesting as it gets indeed. And okay, I want now to touch a little bit about the business side, as you mentioned, all the go-to-market engineers, because we're seeing now the transition from deploying code to generating code with all the AI tools that we've heard over the last couple of weeks very often, like Cloudbot and Codex and others. But has this shifted your go-to-market approach in any meaningful way or not necessarily?
It has in a number of ways. So way one, I'll say is so obviously you're seeing everyone use these tools, but there's still a gap between prototype and production. And by production, I mean this is being used in prod at scale for legitimate transformation. And so that's where we're actually getting to that phase of the life cycle and seeing a lot of impact. I think some of the things we're doing effectively in that area is actually in how we think about building these agents, where I think a lot of times folks are attempting to boil the ocean with an agent. So starting with the macro problem rather than the micro problem, by which I mean, setting out to build an AI SDR versus setting out to automate a specific aspect or a specific play within sales development. So Vercel, as an example, I think we will probably have mostly automated the non-live, like non-spoken or over video or whatever portions of outbound call within this next 6 months or so. But we did that by going one play at a time. So first inbound, how do you automate the qualification, the research, the outreach, the scheduling? Next one, event follow-up. A lot of folks go to events like reInvent. You get 3,000 booth scans. You got to follow up on them. Most teams don't actually do it because 90% of those are going to be Gmail addresses and not that great. So we went and we then automated that one, the qualification, the follow-up. How do you go out and find that Yossi put his Gmail address in, but he's actually a BFD and we do want to call him. So do that type of research. So we're going that way. The same thing happened with our support agent. So we now have over 87% of support at Vercel is deflected, fully automated by AI. And that's pretty surprising, I think, because we have very technical support coming in. So these aren't just transactional type of support cases. But that, again, was not I'm going to just go and build some macro support agent. It was, okay, let's take this class of cases that are either high volume or high impact. And then let's take this class and continue with pretty, in both cases, a lot of human in the loop. It wasn't I'm going to go one shot an agent to automate a full function. There was a real acknowledgement that you got to train the agent, give it better context, refine what it's doing, just like you would do with an employee.
When I went to the last RSA and the last CES conferences, so there are not so many calls that really get to me because some of them go to my Gmail account indeed. So I guess it's now more relevant than ever. And you mentioned also human in the loop with the AI SDK 6 and new agentic features which letting humans essentially guide AI. How do you see human in the loop capability change the economics for enterprises deciding whether to build the AI solutions or maybe even to develop it in-house rather than buy it?
I think a decent number of enterprises for major workflows will choose to build in-house ultimately, because the reality is your business context is reasonably esoteric. So if you think of SaaS previously, SaaS sort of forced all of us into working a certain way, right? Here's the CRM approach as outlined by Salesforce. Here's how you do performance reviews as outlined by your HRIS, et cetera. And there's always been this stat that all of these major system of record providers have touted, which is something along the lines of, for every $1 that gets spent on our software, $7 gets spent in the ecosystem. And I would purport that that was a bug, right? Like that actually, what that meant was, in order to make the $1 I spent on the system of record useful, I had to go spend 7 on other things to customize it, to add incremental functionality, et cetera. And so I think now you're going to have a lot of scenarios where the build by calculus, given software cost trending towards zero, makes more sense to build a bespoke CRM that perfectly maps the workflow you want people to follow, the information you want to collect. And then on the human in the loop front, I actually think we've seen real value in keeping humans in the loop with our agents for an extended period. And it's not, we don't pull them out of the loop until you reach the point where like the humans say, I can't edit this anymore. Like there's literally no more feedback for me to give.
It's super interesting indeed. With now all the vibe coding tools out there, I think it was the CEO of Atlan that she mentioned it's all about the context of the agents. And once it has the right context, then it could really pull it off and move to the next level without human in the loop. So it's fascinating. And Vercel is very much about all the developers community, right? You have a close relationship with all of them, and you need to essentially know what they want in order to keep Vercel to be at the top of innovation, right? But I guess also there are many AI frameworks that emerge rapidly. How does Vercel ensure that, for example, Next.js continue to evolve while balancing the community needs with the enterprise requirements from the other side of the equation?
A couple of things. One is just like a real emphasis, as you've outlined, on community engagement. So we obviously have a DevRel team that's deeply involved with the community. The Next.js team is always interacting with folks in the community as well. I mean, Guillermo, our founder, is just like, I think he's probably cloned himself 100 times somehow. Like he seems to be eternally online, catching absolutely every possible thing out there. So I think we've got that going for us. But then on the enterprise side, one of the things we really focused on, and this almost goes back to where we started on GTM EPD alignment, is building a real muscle around design partnership. So we've developed a strong point of view internally on what are the enterprises or the most innovative digital natives out there that we want to invest with really deeply to understand their requirements, where there might be an opportunity or a gap in kind of what they need relative to our roadmap. And then how do we go build, with and for them, because we think what they want is indicative of what others will want in the future. I think this was something I absolutely learned at Stripe. I think Stripe is renowned for talking about how, some of its biggest innovations came from partnering with Lyft on instant payouts, partnering with Shopify to develop Stripe Connect. So if you look at actually Stripe Billing started with partnering with Squarespace, right? Like almost every single one of Stripe's major product lines started with one of our top customers coming to us and saying, hey, you're not solving this for me. It seems adjacent to what you're doing. Like, can we work on that together? And we're doing similar things here at Vercel. And then I think the market, given how fast everyone wants to iterate right now, when you layer in more of this forward deployed engineering motion where you're actually shoulder to shoulder with folks, it just sort of accelerates that ability to partner that much more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's a little bit similar to what happened with Microsoft and all of Office that we see now with Word and Excel. It essentially came from sort of like their design partner in a way. And okay, now I guess also we see a lot of multi-models allowing companies to switch between AI models much easier than ever before. But does it influence your product roadmap or even go-to-market motion in any meaningful way? Meaning, does becoming more neutral layer across providers is really the something that you aspire to be?
Think of Vercel very much as a platform as a service. So our job is to enable all of our customers to ideally do what they need to do to create the best products with the least amount of incremental infrastructure build. So on the multi-model, multimodal, we have the AI gateway, which sits on top of the AI SDK. And so this AI SDK will let you switch between models. AI gateway does the same, but also with a bunch of observability, traceability, et cetera, built in. So we're basically trying to enable folks to be able to do that. Hey, model drops on a Saturday. You'd have a fair amount of work to go integrate that. Or we've got our DevRel team that's partnering deeply with all of these labs, as well as the other ones that aren't just your Anthropic or OpenAI, et cetera, but all the other different types of models. And so those are integrated and ready to go the minute they drop their new model. And then you can just come and test it, which similarly with the AI gateway, like a big value is you don't need API keys or you don't need keys and you avoid rate limits. So maybe there's a massive launch on a Saturday. You've never worked with that model before. You can just go and spin up use of it immediately. And then if it's producing really good results for you, continue to use it. Or if not, be able to go back to what you were using prior.
Absolutely. I have one last question before I pass the mic to Jason. So obviously, Vercel, developer first teams with now going into the enterprise a little bit more. But what are the biggest challenges when you go to the enterprise actually with selling AI native infrastructure? And if you can share with us, how do you address these challenges?
One of the challenges right now is a lot of folks. So digital native companies, a lot of them sort of did what I'll call wave one of AI, right? They were early on the assistant bandwagon. We're now getting squarely into the agent bandwagon. But so they've had a little bit more of a sense of like, where does this likely break? What's going to need to be true to run something at scale in production? And you have some companies in traditional enterprise that have done that as well. I think there are a lot of banks who saw pretty early on the power here and have done a ton of prototypes internally and are ready to go to production. With enterprise, I think a couple challenges you have is like, one, they still don't totally have a sense for what they need, right? Like folks know, hey, there's an opportunity here with AI, but they don't necessarily know what workload to start with. And
sort of like a FOMO or
a little bit, right? And then they don't know how to see around corners on like, hey, when this starts to scale, what am I going to need to have be true? I think there's also a lot of talk around what we were talking about previously of the SDLC. And at this point, no one has a point of view of, okay, here's how this stabilizes. And so everybody wants to know, how do I change? But the reality is that in enterprise, there's a much bigger change management challenge of, if I now employ 5,000 engineers that I want to get to behave differently, or I employ 100 business leaders that are now going to participate in the SDLC, right? So there's real change management for enterprises too. And then they're also rightfully very security conscious. So this is another thing that Vercel is thinking a lot about is how do you get auth, permission, security right for an agent because the paradigm isn't necessarily the same as the human. And then further, arguably in enterprise, we're in one of like the world's worst shadow IT moments ever with all of the vibe coding happening. And people accidentally leak keys onto the internet, leak company data onto the internet because they didn't realize that that little startup they were playing with to help them vibe code actually hadn't thought through things like, hey, when you click publish, ask whether or not this should be published to the intranet or the internet, right? So those are all things that enterprises are going to have to think about that I've really been enjoying working through at Vercel.
Specifically with all the change management notion, I guess now with the adoption rate is blazingly fast, more than ever, even more than the internet. Suddenly you want to implement it, but you're not sure how. And if you do implement it, so will people actually use it at the end? So, Jeanne, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure. And Jason, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Yossi. Jeanne, it's been enjoyable listening to you. I have a few more questions. When you're selling to enterprises, it's frustrating when the sale is lost on price. And I believe you have this notion that lost sale is not actually about price. That's really just an underdiagnosis of a deeper issue. So how do you push teams to uncover what is that deeper issue and how to actually close the sale that's not explicitly about the price.
I think what you're referencing, one of the very first agents we built, we've since overwritten this, but it was called LostBot. So this was earlier last summer. And the genesis of it was we were going and looking at all the deals that we had lost that quarter. Is the day after the quarter closed. And there was a 6-figure deal and I said, lost a price. And I was like, I pinged my GTM engineer and I was like, I would love to better understand why we lost this deal and like if it were actually winnable. And so we went and built this agent that listened to every single Gong transcript, read Slack, read email, sort of had full context on a deal. And then we gave it context. So we're like, here's MedPick, if folks are familiar with that sales methodology. So, and here's some context on Vercel. We've got this well-built knowledge base, et cetera. And so it came back and said, hey, the reason you actually lost is you never talked to an economic buyer. And when you talked to the person you'd been engaging with, you presented an ROI story, and it was clear from that conversation that they didn't really buy your ROI conversation, which for me was great. I was like, that's just a bug. That's a bug in my sales process. I have not effectively enabled my sales team to be able to quantitatively sell Vercel. So that's now what we're very focused on doing is doing more real-time coaching within deals, doing more sort of analysis of bugs within our sales process. So we have an entire Slack channel where after every call, the agent is identifying objections that occurred on that call. And then it identifies the degree to which it was well handled. So we basically have like red, yellow, green. And those get fed into a channel where we then can go through and be like, okay, well, why couldn't we handle that objection? Is it we actually have that in our objection guide and clearly that person hadn't memorized the answer? Is it doesn't exist in our objection guide, but there's a very clear answer. We just need to add it. Is it in fact a real blocker in our product? And so you basically can start looking at your go-to-market approach as a product itself. And anytime you don't win, what were the root causes that are fixable bugs or feedback for the roadmap or whatever to ostensibly get to 100% win rate at some point.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant scheme you set up there to address that issue. I have one quick follow-up. I imagine the information asymmetry that the sales team has poses also a challenge, and asking the right questions is probably half of the battle so that you can really understand their market opportunities and how your technology can actually be a game changer in capturing them. I guess I'm lobbing that in your direction to see whether it resonates and if you would expand on that.
One of the sales adages is actually the best salespeople are the best question askers. And most of what good selling is actually good discovery. And so that's one of the things, again, as we sort of think about humans versus agents, is like, it's still on me as a business leader to understand what amazing discovery looks like for Vercel, specifically for a certain type of customer with a certain set of challenges, and then encode that either in human-to-human enablement that I'm doing or ways to build that into an agent that might be able to prompt and coach. So I think that part doesn't change really. You have to have a point of view. That's why we're going to continue to have humans in my view in the loop. But what does change is the probability that all of the people I employ will be able to replicate what I consider to be best practice.
I think that's spot on. So one of the things we've seen the rise of, especially in the AI moment, is this GTM engineer, really forward deployed engineering folks. So I'm curious if you see the traditional AE account executive role eventually merging into more of a technical role. I guess what if you had to prognosticate on what the future of sales teams look like, what would you say?
Well, so first of all, there's sort of two definitions of a GTM engineer. There's one that I would say is the version Clay uses, which is more of a sales engineer, but is just kind of like that closer to the customer. And then there's the way I use it, which is I have an engineering team that works directly with me to bring AI to bear on the GTM organization. It's actually like an internal org. So in the first bucket, because that's a little bit more where your question was, debate this a lot. I really actually think it depends on what you're selling. And if I think of at Vercel, there are conversations even pre-AI that are extremely technical, right? And so that's where you're going to bring in a solution architect or a sales engineer, and we can call it a GTM engineer, we can call it a forward deployed engineer. It's a technical resource that's existed for decades at this point. And then you've got an account executive that ought to be able to speak to business value, understand. I think what changes about an AE mostly is like they just need to be more product minded, in my view, because I actually think more of us are going to become builders. And so, whereas before it might be like, okay, figure out their challenges, figure out their business context, align our product and its value to those, right? It was sort of the job of an AE. Now it's going to be a little bit more, what do you need to build given your business context and challenges? And how can I help you craft that using our solution?
And the rise of vibe coding is making that more and more feasible, right? Which is exciting that we're seeing these lines blur. So I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but the incumbents of AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, these hyperscalers, we've seen them push deeper into AI infrastructure. I'm curious how you understand Vercel in relation to them competitively. What truly differentiates Vercel?
To be clear, we're super close partners of AWS. For us, I think it's a couple things where one is at the DX layer, as I mentioned, which is like Vercel is just known for developer experience. And so AWS has amazing infrastructure primitives, but you are putting those together. So it's like giving you the Legos, but you got to go make the castle. Whereas Vercel is giving that to you. In the simplest terms, it's managed infrastructure and a DX platform, right? And so instead of me spinning up Kubernetes clusters, thinking about utilization as I now start using a bunch of sandboxes for different agentic capabilities, right? We'll do that for you. You don't have to think about it. And then we also give you this platform that lets you iterate, collaborate, et cetera, a lot faster. So that's how I'd sort of relate it. So it's got parallels to Stripe, totally same, like same, but different, which was Stripe was all 6 lines of code, abstract away complexity. That's some of what Vercel is doing in a different context as well. And then I would also just say, because I think we do such an excellent job of being deep in the developer and startup zeitgeist, we also get really early looks at the next unsolved problem for builders out there. And so as a good example of this, we brought Fluid Compute to market in June. Fluid Compute is a compute primitive that is basically, you're not going to just like sit. You've got longer duration tasks, and typically that would sit there, compute would run, you'd run up a big bill. This now lets you sort of spin things up and spin things down, but without cold starts. Lambda now has a similar concept, but we brought that to market in June because, again, we needed that ourselves in order to build V0. But at the end of the day, we are like super symbiotic with AWS as well. So partner deeply.
Do you feel like as they evolve and push deeper into AI, the DX will still be the kind of bleeding edge of your competitive advantage?
I think so. What we're talking about is like the agentic DX, because I probably would have said no on some level if we weren't doing a good job of switching into agentic DX and what we call self-driving infrastructure, which is, humans aren't going to write all the code, aren't going to do all the PRs, et cetera. So I think we'll do a good job of flipping over into, okay, like I was describing previously, like how do you automatically fix a build with an agent? How do you do anomaly detection with an agent? We'll probably get there quicker. And then same thing on self-driving infrastructure is like, you can go vibe code an awesome app in Claude tomorrow, today, this afternoon. When you go to deploy it, you might wind up spending $5,000 on infrastructure that should have been $5 versus using Next.js and deploying to Vercel. You're more likely to keep that at $5.
That's incredible. Just to pivot a little bit more to that future of work topic, as again, the vibe coding phenomenon. Do you think the builder mindset will continue to evolve, like more generalist developers? Will we continue to see high demand from like deep technical specialists, or?
I think you're still going to see demand for deep technical specialists. We had a new grad dinner at Vercel. So one of the things Vercel does a really incredible job at is our intern program. So all the folks who joined as new grads, we did a day with our executive team. We went out to dinner with everybody. And I was sitting across at dinner, a new grad, so 90 days post-college, and our CTO. And one of the questions I asked them was, hey, if I were to go to the two of you and like delegate the exact same engineering problem, you're going to use the exact same tools, like basically everything's going to be the exact same, but just two different humans. Like, who, if when you then to go do a code review of what Claude output, whose will be better? And both of them immediately were like, oh, Malta or CTO. Like, I do think that at least for a period will continue to be the case. And then it probably depends a little bit on what you're building. Like if you're building Vercel, understanding how infrastructure works, like complicated stuff probably is to your benefit. I don't know that lots of people are going to be out there building net new at scale SaaS applications, but like you could make an argument there that type of software engineering does legitimately commoditize and be handled entirely by a model.
We're still a ways away from that possibility. So I'm going to shift gears to the rapid fire questions, which are more fun and personal in nature. So what hobbies or passions do you enjoy outside of work?
Well, I would say working at Vercel is a pretty hard job. And then I have a 3 and 5-year-old. So I mostly work and do kids, but I am still really into skiing. I was able to get my 3-year-old out on skis for the first time this year. And then I love cycling. I don't do as much as I used to do. Once upon a time, I did half Ironmans and like completed, not competed. But when I can, I do try to get on the bike.
That's amazing. Well, I don't even complete, let alone compete. So if you could have coffee with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh man, I got asked this question in a college application interview a very long time ago, and I don't know who I answered then. Who would I mean, it's probably a bit of a throwaway answer, but I always do think it's like really, I'm curious to have met sort of like my great grandparents, right? And one, do you just like get a sense for any sort of like the familial connectivity? Like, can we tell that we were related? And then always interesting to like get an actual sense of what it was like to live in a different era.
Yeah, I like that. And lastly, any advice for entrepreneurs nowadays, especially, given the advent of AI?
I was discussing this with a very successful founder earlier this week, and he asked me the most meta question ever, which was like, what is a company in the age of AI? And the answer I ended up giving him was that I think a company is basically decisions around strategy and taste. Because at the end of the day, AI will get closer and closer to doing a bunch of things, but you still have to pick those things. Where do you want to point the AI and what is the bar you're going to set for it? So give that a shot.
Nice. That's quite insightful. Well, that's all I have for you, Jeanne. I'll pass to Yossi to wrap up.
So, Jeanne, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really a pleasure hosting you and learning from all your experience and showcasing just Vercel innovation. So thank you so much. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other amazing episodes coming up from the president of Cisco, president of ServiceNow. So it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned.